Eighth graders, today is day number 3 of our automation project. Most of what we're going to go over here is information that you did in class already. So as a class, you read the writing robots behaviors information. You took notes on complex, simple, and basic behaviors. This video is for you if you missed class or maybe you missed some of the notes and need to go back and copy those down in your design notebook. And so that's what we're going to do here. We're going to go through the writing robot behaviors information. We're going to take notes on simple, complex, and basic behaviors, and then you're going to respond by answering 2 questions that are in your design notebook. And all of this is done in the developing ideas portion of your design chart. So right now, if you don't have your design notebook open, go ahead and pause the video and open up your design notebook. Your design notebook now should be open up. Once again, we are on day number 3. So together here, we're going to read the writing robot behaviors. We are going to take some notes about complex, simple, and basic behaviors, and then your homework is going to be to respond to 2 questions at the end of your notes here in your design notebook. So let's scroll down to find developing ideas. So this is the information that we are going to go through today here. So follow along with me as I read over here in the left-hand column this information about writing robot behaviors. A behavior is anything your robot does. Turning on a single motor is a behavior, moving forward is a behavior, tracking a line is a behavior, navigating a maze is a behavior. We're concerned with 3 main types of behaviors: basic, simple, and complex behaviors. All right, complex behaviors. An example of a complex behavior would be following a defined path through an entire maze. These are behaviors at the highest levels, such as navigating an entire maze. Though they may seem complicated, one nice property of complex behaviors is that they are always composed of smaller behaviors. All right, so what is a complex behavior? Let's write next to complex behaviors here. I'm going to write this in red. Complex behaviors are the overall tasks. Okay? That's what a complex behavior is. It's the overall task that a robot does. Okay? They are complicated. I'm going to highlight that because that's important to know about complex behaviors. And they are always composed of smaller behaviors. So when you think of going through a maze, I'm going to highlight this. When you think of going through a maze, that's a complex behavior. But it can be broken down into smaller parts. So when you first enter a maze, you might have to go forward, then you have to make a turn, and you think about how you kind of draw a pencil line through a maze that you might be solving on paper. It's the same thing for a robot. There's different steps, different things that have to happen. And so you can break down that overall task into smaller behaviors. Okay? Pause the video right now, get these things highlighted, and write down that complex behaviors are the overall tasks. Now that you have that done, let's go down to simple behaviors. Simple behaviors, an example of a simple behavior would be to move forward for 2 seconds. Simple behaviors are small, bite-sized behaviors that allow your robot to perform a simple yet significant task, like moving forward for a certain amount of time. These are the most useful behaviors because they're big enough that you can describe useful actions, but small enough that you can program them easily using basic Robot C commands. Robot C is a platform that if we were in the classroom we would be using to do computer programming. So it's just the program that we use to do our coding to get our robotics to work. Okay, so what is a simple behavior? Well, a simple behavior, if we look at this, just means, I'm going to choose green for this one, a simple behavior, these are the steps. So again, if the complex behavior is the overall task, what are the steps to get that robot to go through a maze? Well, first example might be that it needs to move forward for 2 seconds. Okay? Simple behaviors are simple yet significant tasks. So that's what we're going to highlight in that section. Okay? That's what a simple behavior is. Go ahead and pause the video, write down what a simple behavior is, and get that highlighting done. Now we're on to basic behaviors. An example of a basic behavior would be turning on motor port 3 at half power. At the most basic level, everything in a program must be broken down into tiny behaviors that your robot can understand and perform directly. In Robot C, again, that's a platform that we would use to do our coding if we were in class. These are behaviors the size of a single statement or action, like turning on a single motor. So, basic behavior. What is a basic behavior? A basic behavior is a single action. That's what a basic behavior is. And when we are coding, we need to understand, we need to take a complex behavior and we need to break it down all the way down into basic behaviors. These are single statements or actions. Okay, that's what I want to highlight in terms of what a basic behavior is. Okay, so go ahead and pause the video, write down that a basic behavior is a single action, and get your highlighting done. Continuing on, right here. The most important idea in behaviors is that they can be built up or broken down into other behaviors. Complex behaviors like going through a maze can always be broken down into smaller, simpler behaviors. These in turn can be broken down further and further until you reach the most basic behaviors that you can recognize and program. Sometimes it can be difficult to tell whether a behavior is simple or complex. Some programs are so complex they need multiple layers of simple behaviors before they reach the basic ones. Basic, simple, and complex are categories of behaviors which are meant to help you think about the structure of a program. They are points of reference in the world of behaviors. In order to get a robot to go through a maze, the robot doesn't know how, and so we need to break it down into the most basic, simple, individual, single actions to tell it exactly how to do that. Okay? So the important information here is that behaviors can always be built up or broken down into other behaviors. So go ahead and highlight that. And then one more thing, that the most basic behaviors are what we recognize and can be used then for computer programming. And so that's why we're going through this, so we can understand how to program a robot to do what we want it to do, to automate it, by completing those single actions which eventually make up the complex behavior, the larger overall task. So go ahead and get that highlighted, pause your video. All right, scrolling back up to the top of our developing ideas category, we're now going to work over here on the right-hand side. This diagram that you see right here has kind of complex behaviors on the left, simple behaviors here in the middle, and then basic behaviors over here on the right. So let's say I've got a robot. Here's my John Deere tractor robot. Let's say I want this robot to drive through a maze and get to the end. The complex behavior, the overall task, is for this robot to follow the path to reach a goal. So what are the steps? Well, the first little box over here in the simple behaviors and the steps are that it needs to drive forward for 3 seconds. The next step is that it's got to make a turn, a 90-degree turn. And then the third step here is to drive forward again for 5 more seconds. And then it would go on to get through the maze. If we take this first step, moving forward for 3 seconds, and break it down into the most basic behaviors, well, what are those individual actions? Number one is to turn on the left motor. A lot of our robots have a motor that controls each side. If I turn one motor on, these wheels are going to spin. These are not, and it's just going to spin in a circle. Okay? So I've got to first turn on the left motor. That's one action. Number two, I've got to turn on the right motor. That's another action. So I turn both of the motors on. Number three, well, now that I want it to drive, what do I need to do? I need to wait for 3 seconds. It needs to drive a certain distance. So once the motors are on, the next individual action is to wait for 3 seconds. Then what do we want the robot to do? We want it to stop, number 4 and number 5. So we turn off the left motor, we turn off the right motor. You can go ahead and look at this chart to kind of see the steps, or excuse me, the basic behaviors that go with the other 2 steps. Now that you've had a chance to review that, we are going to complete the chart below by writing the complex, simple, and basic behaviors for a mobile robot. So if I have this complex behavior, this is all a complex behavior. I'm just going to do Control-C. I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to paste it right in here. Okay? This is the complex behavior. I don't have to go ahead and type that. This whole thing is what I want the robot to do. Let's label our complex, simple, and basic behaviors just so we remember. Okay, this, again, is the overall task. So So I'm going to change that to match up with the color before. Overall task. The simple behaviors, this I had in green, so the simple behaviors, these are the steps. And the basic behaviors are the single actions. Okay, so go ahead and label complex, simple, and basic behaviors by writing these right here above it. Pause your video and do that. Now that we have those reminders, we're ready to break this complex behavior down into a simple behavior. So if I look at this, when a push button is pressed, a mobile robot will go as fast as possible for 20 feet, which takes 10 seconds, and then stop. We've got some clues in this simple or in this complex behavior. There's commas that separate steps. There are words like and that separate steps. Okay? Words like then that separate steps. So we've got 3 different steps in this. Can you guess what they are? If you look at this, we've kind of given you a hint where we've underlined the steps. So the first one, the first step or simple behavior is that a push button is pressed. That's the first simple behavior, the first step. The second step is that it will go as fast as possible for 10 seconds. That's the second step. And then the third step is that we want the robot to stop. Pause the video and copy down those simple behaviors. Now that we have the simple behaviors, we can move on and break those down into basic behaviors. So, pushing a button, that is only one single action. So our basic behavior is that the button is pressed. Press the button. There's only one thing. So the simple behavior and the basic behavior are the same thing. Now, how do we get our robot to go as fast as possible for 10 seconds? Well, the first thing that we want to do is we want to turn the motors on. So we're going to turn on our motors. Okay? We're going to turn on our motors. Once our motors are turned on, what do we want to do? Well, we know that the robot is going to run for 10 seconds, so we just want the robot to wait. The motors turn on, and it waits. So we're going to wait for, oops, I got to spell correctly. We're going to wait for 10 seconds. That's one individual action. Now, how do we get the motors to turn off? Well, we want to turn off the left motor and then turn off the right motor. And I did make a mistake up here because if I turn both motors on, that's actually 2 different things. So I'm going to just say I'm going to turn on the right motor, and then I'm going to hit enter, and I'm going to now say turn on the left motor. Because remember, in our robot, we have a motor controlling the left side, we have a motor controlling the right side. So go ahead and type in these basic behaviors. We just took this complex behavior and we broke it down into all these basic behaviors. This is the information we're going to need when we do our computer programming. Let's go to the next one. We're going to complete the next chart by doing the same thing. Here is the complex behavior. When a button is pressed, an LED light turns on for 3 seconds and then turns off. Then the robot drives at half speed for 5 seconds and stops. So let's take this. We're going to copy that. Control C. We can go down here to our complex behavior and paste that in there because that's the overall task that we want our robot to do. I am going to label each of our behaviors. So now that we have these labeled, the next step is to break this complex behavior into simple and basic behaviors. Challenge yourself, pause the video now, and see if you can fill in these bullet points with the simple behaviors and the single action or basic behaviors over here in the right column. Was this what you came up with? Are these the 4 steps that you were able to break that complex behavior down? And then were these the basic behaviors that you got? If they were, awesome. If they weren't, that's okay. We're going to continue practicing. So now would be a good time to pause this video and get these copied down, the simple and the basic behaviors, if you haven't done them already. So go ahead and pause the video. Now that you have those, your homework is just to answer these 2 questions. Number 1, take the complex behavior of brushing your teeth and break it down into smaller behaviors. Number 2, explain why it's important to think of computer programs as a set of basic, simple, complex